Okay, hi and welcome to our first series in starting out in using Blender. So I've been a Maya user for ages and I'm just returning back to Blender from probably a 3-year break, so I'm probably a little rusty. So just bear with me. What we're going to do today is we're going to just have a look at using materials and lighting within the modeler. So I've set up this kind of simple scene here where I've got 3 different spheres. I've got one material is an illuminated material, one is a reflective material, and one is a glass type material. That's why the reflection's upside down there. And also I've got a ground plane here, which I've just got a desert style texture, and I've got a HDR map mapping the light onto the world. Okay, so we'll start right out from the beginning, and it'll probably take about 5 minutes or so to run through this tutorial. So I've got a folder there that's got all the material in it you'll need. So let's make a start. Okay, so first things, I've downloaded Blender, the latest version from blender.org. So whenever you need it, you can go and get it from the site, and they're constantly updating the software. So that's a really good thing about it. Let's just head back into the modeler. So I've got it open at the moment, so I'm going to open a new file. Okay, so that's fine. We'll reload a startup file, and when we go into the world, first thing is I've got this set as Blender Render as default, so we'll change that to Cycles, which is the live render, which is one of the best features of Blender, I think. Okay, so what we're going to do first is I'm going to delete that cube out of our world. So I'm going to use the X key to do that. Hit once, hit my X, hit return, and it's gone. That's okay. And I'm going to add in a mesh now. So I'm going to come down to mesh, and I'm going to select here a UV sphere, and I'm just going to place a UV sphere into my scene. Now I can use my middle mouse button, hold that down, and that helps me to rotate around the scene. And okay, so all I really want to do here, and I'll just be fairly rough with this, is I'm just going to raise this ball up a little bit so it's sitting just slightly above that grid that you can see in here. I'm going to go Shift D, and I'm going to hit maybe my Y key, and it'll move along. You can see how when I hit my Y key it lights up that green axis. I'm going to go Shift D again, hit my Y key, and I'll move that one along over that side. Okay, so first up, that's pretty easy. So we've just duplicated out a sphere 3 times, and we'll put different materials onto each sphere. And the other thing we'll do is we'll add in a ground plane. So I'll come down here under mesh again, select plane, and we've got a plane sitting down the bottom. Now we need to scale that up so it's nice and large. So I'm going to hit my S key and just drag out my mouse. And there we go. So we've got a nice large ground plane. And the other thing I might do while I'm here is I'm going to select, we can see this object here is a light. I'm just going to hit X and delete that light out of our scene because we're going to add in a HDR light instead. Okay, so if at the moment we're in a modeling view, so we're just seeing the object is fairly solid. But one of the great things about Blender is we can come down here to this little box, the viewport shading, and we can flip it up onto rendered. And the first thing that we can see is when it starts rendering our world, and let's zoom in and have a look, is that it's a really flat grey. It's got no real light sources because I removed that initial light that we had there, but we're about to tidy that up. Okay, so I'll go back to solid again. The thing when you're using render view is it's hard on the battery on your computer because the computer is doing a lot of processing, so just be aware that you might need to plug your laptop in while you're doing that sort of work. Alright, here we go. So we've got the main setup happening. First thing I'm going to do, let's have a look at the materials here, and we'll set ourselves up with some. Okay, so this toolbar along here, I'm going to select the material, which is this sphere shape, and we can see here that when I click on it, it's just gives me the option for new. So I'll click on new, and this can be my first material, and down here under the surface the material type is diffuse. Okay, so let's change it up to something else. So let's change it to an emission. So an emission material creates a light source, and we might just click on that white bar there, and we might just warm that up a little bit by popping a bit of yellow onto that. Okay, it'll make it look a little bit more of a natural sort of light source. That's good. So let's select the second one, and we'll go new. And again, I'll change diffuse down to a glossy material. That's good. Okay, and I'll leave that white, and we won't touch it too much more than that. You can see the roughness is on like 0, so that means it'll be like a highly polished chrome type finish. As we start to move that roughness up, it'll start to texture the surface, but we'll keep it super reflective for the moment. And the third one, we'll add a new, and diffuse, I'll change that down to a glass material. Okay, so we'll keep it pretty simple for starters, and the ground, we'll change that as well. Now you can't really see those changes much when we're in this solid view, but you can move up to a material view, and you can see now that the material view shows us roughly what's happening. So we can see some small changes there, but not huge changes. So I'm just going to go new. I've selected the ground plane. I'll go new, diffuse. That's fine, and I might just keep it pretty simple for this one. And I might just add in sort of a slightly sandy looking kind of colour. Bottom, it's a bit tricky to dial in there. That'll do, okay. I'll tune that up a little bit later on. Okay, so let's start to have a look at our scene in rendered mode. And we can see that, so I flipped that up into render, we can start to see that we've got this emission material on one ball. We can see we've got the reflection of it in the next one, which is our chrome sphere, and the glass is like inverting the light as we see it. Okay, so that's starting to work, but the next thing that we need to do is we're going to dig into the nodes area on Blender, and this is a really interesting area. So I'm going to all these panels. You can see down here there's a timeline along the bottom, and if I just slowly bring my mouse up, it gives me this little icon, and I can start to make that window a little bit larger. So I'll push it up to about halfway, and we can repurpose any of those windows at any time with this little tab down in the left hand corner. So I'm just going to click on it, and I'm going to swap it into Node Editor. Okay, and the node editor lets us change and reorder connections with the way materials and objects work. It's a really fantastic system. So I'm going to click on the world over here, and you can see it looks like a globe of the world, and I'm going to click on use nodes, which will get things happening for us. Okay, so we're going to work on the nodes now, and we're going to add in a lighting system into our world called a HDR sphere. So let's just click on the world down here on the bottom panel. Okay, and at the moment we can see we've got a grey background on our world, which we know we've got, and that's mapping it onto basically the surface. So the surface just means the sphere that wraps around our world. So if you think of that as like the atmosphere. So what we're going to do is add a new node. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to add an environment texture. Okay. Environment texture, I'll just pop this in here. That's good, and I'm just going to hook up color to the yellow. Okay, so when you're using these nodes, the usually you go same colored dot to same colored dot, and the information flows from the left to the right of the scene, and you'll find there are like recipes for these, so you can cook them up in lots of different ways. So you've noticed now that in our world that it's displaying as pink, so that's the default, this sort of like bright pink magenta color. If you've got a piece of a node that hasn't got it's looking for an image texture but it hasn't got one yet, usually goes pink. So it's an easy way to signify that it needs data adding to it in the way of a picture. So let's just click on open. Now I've got a folder made up for you that's handy, that's got the Blender Shoot One resources, and I'm going to go into the folder called Mono Lake, and you can see here that it's got some files, and I'm going to choose this one, high res JPEG. You can see it's 9.43 meg, so it's not super big, but it's big enough for what we're doing. So I'm just going to go open image. Okay, and the first thing that we can start to see now as we start to look around our world, so I'm just going to start to rotate up a bit, is we can see now that we're getting the world around our scene. Okay, and it's starting to bring the light in from that that HDR image. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit on our what we've been creating, and the first thing we can see that these spheres have all got facets on them. They look a bit like crystal disco balls. Let's fix those up now. It's a bit hard to see what you're selecting when you're in your rendered mode, so I'll just pop back into material mode for a second. We can still see those facets on there, so I'm going to add a subsurface modifier. These are a range of modifiers that change the geometry of objects. I'm just going to click on the spanner, which is where our modifiers live. I'm going to add a modifier, so I've selected a sphere, add modifier, and I'm going to look for the subdivision surface down here, and I'll click that up on about 3 and 3. We'll smooth it out. I'm going to do the same, subdivision surface, 1, 2, 3. Oops, 4 is probably going a little high. You want to make sure you don't go too high with these subdivision surface settings, or it'll be too hard on your processor. So it's pretty easy to crash your computer if you go too high. So I wouldn't recommend ever going above 4 unless you're really super keen to. Okay, so gone back into rendered mode, and you can see that our spheres are looking nice and smooth now, so that's all good. But the thing is, when we look at that ground plane, it looks a little bit like it's in shadow at the moment. It's a little bit too dark compared with the surroundings, so we just need to pop up the strength of our scene, and we might go up a little bit more again. So I've got it on 2. Just keep dialing it up until it looks about right. Okay, we're sort of sitting in the shadow in this scene of underneath this cliff here, but that's okay. That's pretty good. Let's have a look at the material on this base here. So on the ground plane, it's looking okay, but it looks like it could be a bit better. It's worth experimenting with this as well. We've got a diffuse on it. You can always add in, if you want to go crazy, add in a gloss, and you'll get this kind of like amazing, reflection of the environment. So that can be an interesting one to play with as well. It's looking like this light might be a bit oversaturated now. I'm just going to pull this node back to maybe 2, and it'll look a little bit better. Okay, so that's really all there is to it. To setting up a HDR and starting to get working with cycles in Blender. The great thing about this node system is it's so flexible. So a little trick that you can do with this, let's just go a little bit, look for a math node. I'm a little bit slow finding these. Should be normal. Converter math node. Okay, so that's what I want. I want one of those, and you can duplicate it, Shift D. Let's get a second one of those, and that's 0.5. I'm changing that to 1, and then I'm going to add a multiply, so I'll change that to multiply. That's good. Okay, so now I'm going to take this value and pop that there, hook this up, oops, hook this one up to here. That's good. And then I'm going to pop this back into the strength and let it go. And you can see how it's just kind of sharpened up the look of this HDR. So it's kind of just affecting the way that it deals with the highlights and the shadows, and it's just tweaking it a little bit. Okay, so it's probably not something you really have to do, but it can just help you get a little bit more high quality look to your HDR render. So that's about it. Have a muck about with the with that technique and see where it gets you. I think it's a good starting one. You might like to add in maybe a monkey head. That's a bit of fun. So you can find that under objects, and let me just rotate around. And I'll just bring him up, grabbing on those arrows. Again, he's got some facets, so I'm going to click on the spanner, add a subdivision surface. That's good, and I'll just pop that up to about 3 to keep it looking good. And let's add in a glass material now, maybe. So I'll just go across to materials, click on new, that's good, and I'll go with the glass material, and I might change the color of it a bit so it's like a little bit more interesting. And let's go into a rendered mode now. Okay, and so now you can see I've got a blue glass monkey head, which is floating around. And because this is live, we can leave the render up, and I can say change that to whatever color I want. And yeah, that's how it works basically. It's really good. And we can mix up emission materials onto that to make the glass glow internally, etc. So it's really, I think it's worth taking some time to learn Blender, because as well as being open source and free, so you can use it anytime you want, it's actually really powerful. It's got a good community around it, and it's constantly being developed. So you can feel like you're on the edge of something new all the time using the software. So give it a go. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in tutorial 2.